Hey everyone, welcome back to the HerbRally podcast. This is Mason. Today's episode is actually an episode from the Rappahannock Radio podcast, hosted by Kiaya Abernathy. And in this one, she interviews herbalist Kat Maier. This interview was so good, I just had to share it, with permission, of course. And Kiaya is a wonderful interviewer, and Kat had so much insight and shared so much wisdom. I know you're going to come away uber inspired from this one, just like I did. Also, I want to say Kat just came out with a book. It's called Energetic Herbalism, a guide to sacred plant traditions integrating elements of vitalism, Ayurveda, and Chinese medicine, aka you could just call it Energetic Herbalism. It's a long subtitle that even Kat struggled with remembering the whole thing. You'll hear that in this interview. It's kind of funny. I'll be sure to include a link to the book in the show notes, or just Google search it. You'll find it. I believe in you. Just type Energetic Herbalism, Kat Maier. That's Maier, M-A-I-E-R. You'll find it. Kat actually sent me a copy of the book. Absolutely love it. Since you're listening to the HerbRally podcast, I know you'll love it too. So my request of you, dear listener, is that you buy this book, support Kat and her work. To learn more about Kat and her work, just head to sacredplanttraditions.com. That's sacredplanttraditions.com. That's her school's website. It's based in Charlottesville, Virginia. Kat's been a teacher for a very, very long time. I've seen her teach at numerous conferences throughout the states now, and always love attending her classes. And she gave a great keynote at the Florida Herbal Conference several years back too. So definitely recommend checking out more of her work. And a little bit more about Kiaya. She's the host of the Rappahannock Radio podcast, as I mentioned. She's the host, creator, producer, technician, and all-around one-woman band. She's the daughter of Billy Abernathy, the musical carpenter, and Sandy Abernathy, who's a gifted herbalist. Her mom's an herbalist, and you'll hear all about that as well in this interview today. After graduating from UVA with a major in anthropology, she moved back to Rappahannock and began playing music in local venues with her dad and with her band Silver and Moonlight. Being back home and interacting with the unique artists of Rappahannock again inspired Kiaya to bring forth the stories of who they are as individuals and as a community. Kiaya says, I want my listeners to feel connected to the songs that I play and to share in a sense of what Rappahannock means to each one of the varied audio and visual artists that call it home. Kiaya continues her love of music, art, and culture by promoting stories from artists and souls that have words to speak and sing. So I haven't had a chance to listen to the other episodes of Kiaya's yet, but I think you'll really dig her interview style and conversational style. So if you love music and podcasts, I definitely recommend checking out her show at RappahannockRadio.com. That's RappahannockRadio.com. She's got lots of episodes published, including this one with Kat Maier. So a huge thanks to Kiaya and Kat for letting HerbRally share this podcast episode. Now I'd like to take 1 minute to read yet another 5-star iTunes review. This one was written by Mugwort, and they say, I love that this podcast features herbalists with such a variety of backgrounds. From learning ancient Greek mythology with traditional plants to sitting with one of my herbal mentors, that's Suzanne Tabert, and listening to her talk about plants in her bioregion. Wonderful surprise, as I didn't know she was this well known, #fangirling. This is a great listen for beginners and advanced herbalists. There is always an interesting topic to click on and enhance your wisdom. Definitely worth checking out. So thanks so much for the written review, Mugwort. And yes, Suzanne is an excellent teacher. We've got at least a few episodes with her, as well as some monographs and even some blog posts. So Suzanne's been a great friend to the HerbRally community. We love working with her, so be sure to check out her work at cedarmountainherbs.com. Lots of good stuff. And if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to leave a review in your podcast player of choice, I'd be endlessly grateful. So yeah, if you use iTunes, please leave some sort of star and written review. It really helps out the discoverability of the show, and I just really like reading them. And if you do leave a review, I'll likely even give it a shout out here on the podcast. So thanks in advance. So one other thing before we get into the show, we just came out with 7 herbal freebies if you sign up for the HerbRally newsletter. And basically, if you want to do that, just go to herbrally.com. There's probably going to be some sort of pop-up that comes up. You'll see it there. Just click on that. You'll see more details. Otherwise, you could just go to herbrally.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page. You'll see the word newsletter. Click on that. And then you could read about the different herbal freebies there. But just to give you a brief rundown, the 7 herbal freebies are a new video with Bevin Clare. It's called 5 Herbal Events Around the World. That's great. So she basically talks about different herbal events worldwide that you want to definitely try to check out, be on your quote unquote herbal bucket list, I suppose. There's a Calendula ebook written by Rosalee de la Forêt. It's 11 pages, and yeah, it has recipes and lots of info about calendula in general. There's an 86-page ebook written by Plant Healer, and that they made that specifically for HerbRally. So big shout out to Wolf and Kiva Harden. So thank you for that. There's also a free adaptogens class. It's an hour-long audio, so that's one of the freebies. There's also a 36-page, I want to say it's a 36-page book excerpt, also by Kiva and Wolf from Plant Healer, and that's from their book. It's an excerpt from their book called Nourishing Foods, so really love that one. Then there's also a 15% off discount for Mountain Rose Herbs and a 10% off discount for the HerbRally shop. So yeah, one more time, to get those 7 herbal freebies, go to HerbRally.com. You'll probably see the pop-up. If you don't, scroll down to the bottom of the page and you'll see the word newsletter. Just click on that. That's all I got for you today. Thanks again. Thanks to Kat. Thanks to Kiaya. And I will talk to you all soon. Bye.
You're listening to Rappahannock Radio. This program is supported in part by a grant from the Claudia Mitchell Fund. Views and opinions expressed in the following interview do not represent Rappahannock Association for Arts and Community or its board. Conscious listening advised. This interview contains adult language and topics of discussion. Really? Speaking loudly is a sign of liver heat?
Mm-hmm.
How did you come to...
Chinese medicine. When you listen to somebody's voice, it's part of the diagnostics.
Oh, wow.
You can hear weeping in a voice, like a fire element. I have a lot of fire, so it'll go up, and then it'll come back down, and it'll go up. And it takes a long time to really hear it. You can hear groaning.
Okay.
When somebody has another imbalance of the earth element. Mm-hmm. So it just takes a long time to really hear that. But
can you hear anything in my voice specific?
Well, I haven't been listening for anything other than joy and excitement.
Well, I think you can hear that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm not listening. You have to sort of turn that diagnostician's ear on and then kind of listen that way.
Can you turn that like on and off?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You have quite the experience with doing that then, right? Otherwise you'd be walking around diagnosing everybody.
Well, I mean, some people
street.
are really obvious. And it's like, oh, earth element. Mm-hmm. Oh, they need a little of that. But it's all going on in my head. Because the last thing I want to do is be out talking about thyroids and
right. You're like, I think you really have a thyroid issue. You should come see me.
The last thing I do.
You mean you're not out there pushing that all the time?
Oh my God, I'm hiding.
Speaking of hiding, you have been working the last, 7 months on your new book.
I have been. It's been a deep, deep dive, a solo dive for 7 or 8 months. The contract came through in August, but it has been gestating for a good couple of years, without a doubt. I can remember the first time I sat down to really begin writing. So it's been in there for a bit of time, but once that contract comes through from a publisher, that's really the seed takes form.
Okay. So you've been caterpillar, you've been pupa phase, right? You've been cocooned in this process.
That's a lovely image. It's just so interesting because, I co-wrote a book before. I wrote a book on bush medicine at San Salvador Island with Jeff McCormick.
In the Bahamas?
In the Bahamas, okay. Yeah. And that was fabulous, but he was very generous by giving me co-author. He really did the majority of the writing, but I began to really see what that process was. So, yes, it is a pupa, and then the chrysalis changes, and then all of a sudden you come through to another point. So it is a real dynamic process, And because of the topic of the book, the name of the book is Energetic Herbalism. They named it. But the subtitle, I have to keep remembering it. It's pretty long. But it is called A Guide to Sacred Plant Traditions, Integrating Elements of Vitalism, Ayurvedic, and Chinese Medicine. So what's so interesting is the publisher, Chelsea Green, and I've really loved working with Chelsea Green. They're not really been publishing herbals. Myself and another author are actually their first venture into herbalism. What they do Alexander Katz's fermentation, Vandana Shiva, the brilliant Indian economist. They do all the permaculture, Gaia's Garden. They're more farming, kind of how-to sustainable living. It's a owner-employee company, just a fabulous publisher. So I was just really honored that they invited me. And also, it's such an exercise in letting go because part of their contract is they name the book, and then they choose the cover. So as I was saying earlier, it's like you have this beautiful baby and someone comes in and names it and then dresses it. But I am really, really fortunate because it's not the title I wanted, but as the book has developed and evolved, they really named it well. It's really what it's about. And so one of the reasons that they moved it so quickly through, like usually authors get a year, 2 year, to do something in 8 months has just been the crucible, just, deep in this world of complete focus and completely infused in this work in Ayurvedic and all these energetic medicines, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of the reasons they really wanted it out is because of COVID and because of the pandemic, and it's so incredibly applicable. Right. And so my intention always has been, who knew I would be sequestered, blessed by isolation. I mean, everybody has their own story of how last year, 2020, really did bring in vision. Right. And I'm not somebody who says, oh, it's all good, because I don't really think it is all good. I'm more of a Buddhist in saying it all is.
Yeah, I like that. And
so how we arrive in realizing, well, it all is. And for the folks in Richmond that I work deeply with who are evicted from their apartments, it's not all good.
Yeah, there's been a lot of pain.
There's a tremendous amount, and then we all get our medicine. Mm-hmm. The times bring our medicine. So for me, the medicine was, I wasn't on the road traveling and teaching. I didn't have all these conferences. My classes went online, so I really had this isolation in my beautiful studio out there. And so that really helped create this incubation, this place of really diving deep. And I had no idea what a journey it would be. And the book is essentially my 3-year training program curriculum. Okay. And so within the covers, my dream was, all right, I'm going to give the world, my community, whoever comes in my path, I want them to have everything I believe in. This is my 3-year program. And so how do I make that accessible? How do I bring in the Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and keeping that authenticity? And so for 30 years, I've really been learning how to teach clinical herbal medicine with integrity, because I only have 3 years. I mean, I'm a physician assistant, and I didn't want medical school because I wanted herbal medicine. But I wanted allopathy. I wanted to learn how to stitch. I wanted to learn medications. I wanted to learn the language of biomedicine so I could then show up for my community and my students and really translate some of the frightening
jargon,
undecipherable language, and just say, no, this is what this means. or I really can't work with you until you go get a biopsy.
Right.
People had been to their past life regressionist or the astrologer. They're going everywhere but. And so I really honor and treasure scientific medicine, but that's for a small percentage of our world. For the majority of what we deal with day in and day out, it really is the plants and foods and whatnot. So
what you just described basically is you're a clinical herbalist. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Explain that a little bit more about the difference between a clinical herbalist versus other types of herbalism, if you will.
I'd love to, and that's so funny. I mean, a lot will be referred from the book because literally it's in publication, so it is foremost in my mind. And what's so interesting is, and bring me back, because I just love to tell stories. But
please. Yes.
The intro is my story.
Okay.
And why I started with my story is right now in herbal medicine, we're really facing the decolonizing that every single institution in our country, or even around the world. Right. I mean, everything is now being confronted with, where are we? Where's the colonizer view? Where's the words? How are we doing that? And so that's huge in herbal medicine. And there are a lot of landmines out there, and it's not going very gracefully because we just really need a lot of time and wisdom and elders. And so part of this book is saying what's my story, how I feel able to speak about the sacred. Right. I did not grow up in a tribe that sang to the mountains, that understood them as kin, that knew them as a relationship. I grew up a Catholic, and the sacred for me was in a wafer. And so I say what my journey is, and part of that journey that I write about is my absolute beloved Rappahannock County.
I was going to say that's your tribe singing to the mountains.
That's
right there.
Who taught me how to sing. And, when I arrived in Rappahannock, it was beautiful Kathy Kiley and Nan Reddick. And, I walk into Nature's Cafe, and there's Ray, and there are all these powerful, powerful women just getting off the job site as construction workers. And I thought, oh my God, this is the goddess incarnate. And they were just so welcoming. But that was in the late 80s, and lived on Miriam Harris's farm in a cabin without running water. And I had graduated from medical school, and I thought I would be hired, get lots of experience stitching and whatnot. And so oftentimes rejections that we think are, all of those no's, they're actually keeping us on the path. And so by my not getting a job as a physician assistant and gathering all this experience that I thought I needed, like tons of rashes and, everything a GP sees, the dream that was dreaming me was the plants. And I feel that there is, when we have our dream, and then there's a dream that dreams us. And so when those two, really merge, that's when we're, I guess you'd call that in the zone now.
The magic
happens. So there I was in Rappahannock on Miriam Harris's farm, and I literally apprenticed to the plants. So I would work at an herb farm in Luray. I would pay $50 a month for rent. I would collect eggs. And I hustled like all of us did in Rappahannock. We were just hustling our livelihoods and really having that authentic lifestyle, whether it's artists or healing. Massage wasn't licensed at that time, so I got a massage table, and I'd go to Middleburg and give massages to really wealthy people in the morning, and then I'd come home and walk in the Shenandoah Park, and I kind of taught myself the plants. Okay. And in those very, very early days was the incredible blessing, like right in the beginning, was meeting your mother. Sandy Liebel is the medicine woman. How she knew, and still does, how she knows and relates to those plants. she and, a few other characters, we were just out in the woods. Peter Hughes, that's where we lived. And we were just in the mountains, learning the plants, harvesting the plants. And so back to the clinical herbalist question, what I did was I did this for 7 years. And even I had the PA background, so I had that skill. I did residencies, I did internships. Over a period of time, I would just freely give recommendations. And after 7 years, the community, Little Washington, Sperryville, they started referring to me, go see the herbalist.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's so powerful because I really am a community-created herbalist. Mm-hmm. I now train clinical herbalists, but it's so funny. Everybody wants the authentic or the way it was. And the way it was is you apprenticed for 25 years. You were an herbalist when you were 40 or 50, and you were community created in that way. And so we've kind of lost that trade, that sharing of that. So that was such a special time for me. And I had such a small apothecary. I could do so much with so many plants. And there's this great author, Suavo Brooks, and he said, a true herbalist can do 40 things with one plant.
Right.
There's versus
so many
one thing
uses
with 40 plants. Mm-hmm. And so, that's sort of where we began, or where I began. So after those 7 years, then I started traveling more. I became more aware of other herbalists, other schools. I was like, oh my God, there's schools for this. Yeah. And Rosemary Gladstar shone her light on me and started inviting me to teach at conferences. And, it's a long story.
For the listeners who don't know this,
of course,
this field as well.
Of course.
Tell us a little bit about Rosemary.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd absolutely love to. So Rosemary Gladstar started, when she was like 23. She was born and raised in Sonoma. She started practicing very wild in the mountains, and then she opened up Rosemary's Garden. And Rosemary's Garden is still flourishing in Sebastopol, California. It's world famous now. And then she went on to start the California School of Herbal Studies. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the first, I think it's the oldest, longest running herbal school. And so she was there for a number of years. They got the land from the sister of, who was it? It was Nina, the Grateful Dead. Were always at their school, were always being treated. They gifted them.
They have a song,
this land.
Rosemary. Is that about her?
So they gifted this beautiful hollow along the Russian River. And so it was those magic days where the spaces in between were so much wider. It just wasn't so dense with everything that kind of takes over today. And so the school was beautiful. Teresa went there. She spent some time at California School. I went and I taught there, just really magical.
So how did you meet Rosemary?
So then she met and fell in love with a fellow who lives on the East Coast. And so she came east. I actually met her in California, but didn't really spend that much time. Then she came east. And she opened up another teaching center outside of Montpelier, Vermont.
Okay.
And it was Sage Mountain Center of Herbal Studies. And it was actually there that I went up and I met her for the first time, and she started inviting me to her conferences. And she started, along with another herbalist, the North New England Women's Herbal Conference. It's been going on for 30-some years. She started the world-renowned International Herb Symposium, where I've gone and taught. That's every other year. So she is this incredible force that gathers so many from so many places. And about 25 years ago, it was actually at an international conference that she gathered a few leaders, and she said, I'm watching what's happening. She's such a visionary. I'm watching what's happening now. Herbal medicine is taking off and it's growing exponentially, and now we have to do something to protect the plants. So she, at that time, founded United Plant Savers. And United Plant Savers has gone on to become, really the main organization in the country that preserves native medicinal plants. It's the ginsengs and the cohosh, and they have an incredible sanctuary in Ohio, and I've been on the board of that for about 13 years, and I was president of the board for 3 years, and brilliant work that's happening. Susan Leopold's the executive director, and now they're first and foremost with training, because this is a critical point, just with the tonnage of the cohosh and the plants that are being harvested.
And make sure that they still have a space, where they can be protected. And I know every time I'm like, well, Mom, I think I want this mint. She's like, no, you don't want that mint. You want this bee balm. You want this native.
There's your mama.
Because, they have to have a space. Otherwise, other plants, plants are beautiful. All plants, I do believe, have a purpose. I'm sure you could, talk about that on and on and on. But, without the native plants here responding to this environment, I think that you would be missing out on so much medicine. It's sort of like when somebody talks about, I guess you could take it to the level of like wine or honey. You have a certain, so whatever is growing in that environment is going to respond to also the toxins of the environment, right? So that healing element has to be in direct connection with the environment. And although we have things that have now been naturalized, right? Where does that stand in terms of herbalism? You have the native plants, but then you have, lavender, right? That's European, but it's incredibly healing.
Well, I'm European. Right. And hopefully you're
naturalized.
Healing, so I'm naturalized.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is, so within this movement of making sure that the native plants are safe, how do you, nobody wants to get rid of the apple tree, and I'm not saying anybody wants to get rid of anything, but I'm saying, where is that synthesis?
Sure. That's such a great question, Kiaya. So one thing, let me go back to the natives, and Robin Wall Kimmerer in her Braiding Sweetgrass, a profound book I highly recommend, even if you're not a plant geek or take herbal medicine. But if you take ginger and salt and pepper, our herbal medicines are on the spice rack.
Right.
Well, what she's done, she's a Potawatomi elder as well as an ethnobotanist, and she's really brought this language of these plants as kin. Mm-hmm. And so these plants, it's not just a creation myth or a creation story. These literally are our ancestors.
Right.
And so for 700 million years, pine trees and these plants, and we aren't even 500,000.
Right.
So
there's so much more to learn.
Whole exponential Carl Sagan kind of evolutionary story to be told. But with these natives, for example, ginseng. Ginseng in the Aralia family has survived the Ice Age. And so, in 2020, we went through political pandemic. We went through incredible amount of stress. But imagine being a rooted creature, and here comes a glacier, and you can't move. And so that ginseng creates chemistry for itself that helps it survive, and then that medicine that it made for itself is actually why ginseng is so profound for us. It's called an adaptogen. It helps us adapt to stress. But man, that plant adapted to incredible stress, right? So they're not here for us.
Right.
But the important thing, as you were saying, with the wine and what do, they hold the matrix of the story. So they hold intact that invisible web that is the story, that is the history, that is something that is so vital and so prominent, and, it's unconscious. But that's why we walk through these mountains and we just have this sense. And those plants are the guardians. They're the storytellers. They hold that. So, yes, we want the medicines and we want the black cohosh.
But it's more than that.
But it is so much more.
Yeah.
There's the pollinators, there are the ephemerals, and so we can plant them. And like we just saw in my garden here, downtown Charlottesville, black cohosh is all over. Goldenseal's taking over. You don't need that shady slope. Don't wait till you have the perfect conditions.
Just
plant the
them.
plants. Just plant them. So that's part of why we want to hold the natives, because we really want to keep that heritage and that story. And then with the other herbs, we so welcome them. I mean, the majority of my apothecary are the Europeans.
Right.
Dandelion. In my book research, I did find out that there is native dandelion, native Canadian dandelion.
But it's not what you typically see.
No, that's European.
Yeah.
And St. John's wort's European. Yarrow, like all of our major medicines are European. So, of course, there's a place for that. And then we look at kudzu, the plant that's taking over the South. I don't know if you know the invasive kudzu, or if your listeners know kudzu, but
I hear about it all the time from my mom.
From your
fighting this. It's like she's that and what is it? The bittersweet. I'm out here battling this bit. I'm okay.
It's a battle. But what's so fascinating, and again, I'm not, and it's all good. Let's let these invasives. There must be a reason, but there is.
Right.
So kudzu, turns out it's steroidal. And of course, look at it. It grows like it's on hypersteroids. It's steroidal, and it's an analog. And an analog means it's a replacement. It's an analog for black cohosh. Now, one of the reasons, in 2015... I can't even tell you the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons. We are not talking pounds. We're talking tons. And I have a digger friend of mine down in Floyd. 10 fresh black cohoshes make a pound. A pound is 2,000 to a ton. We are talking massive amounts of plants being harvested primarily for menopause.
Okay.
Hot flashes, estrogen. That was never a traditional use. Like natives have incredible use of black cohosh. It was rheumatism. It was steroids. Right. So it really helps with hot flashes. And then here comes kudzu, the plant that's eating the South that is equally wonderful for hot flashes. So this is now our work that's part of the reason for the book.
So let me back up 1 second though. So an analog replacement medicine-wise, but then also physically? Like when you move the black cohosh out, is the kudzu then taking over?
No, you keep kudzu, you keep the black cohosh where it is.
No, but I mean like if you're talking about all this tonnage, all this being harvested, right? So I mean, if it's not being replaced, which is one of the reasons why organizations like United Plant Savers are so vital and important to protect the plants, make sure we're being sustainable
Replant them.
about it. But I guess what I'm asking is, so if you come into an area and you harvest a ton, literally, of black cohosh, then is the kudzu then taking over that spot?
Kudzu is funny. Kudzu looks horrific, and it is pretty horrific. But the good thing about kudzu is it's been used in Asian cooking for millennia. It's a cornstarch. It's a thickener. It's a medicine. The Chinese have kudzu in their 50 fundamental herbs.
Isn't that funny how for some people, like this obnoxious entity,
but
this weed,
is.
quote unquote.
Like it is a...
Because it's not in its...
It's weed. It came over from China, lots of things.
Well, if it's not in its natural habitat, right, there's nothing to check it.
Right, and because we don't know its value, well, one, it's a bear. Like, I know I'm on radio and I'll have to be careful, but it's so intense to harvest. It is really hard work to harvest kudzu, but there's a market for it. And there's this great young company, they're permaculturists outside of Asheville, and they're all about kudzu, and they're doing great. And during COVID, Kudzu was a main medicine because what was the lung inflammation? It was boggy, and so steroids or anti-inflammatories. So they ran out of kudzu. Like they ran out of the stores, and so we're just learning. We're
Isn't
going
that fascinating
forward.
then that for
It's
whatever reason, I mean, I'd like to
mind-blowing.
think, as you would say, like the
Yes.
dreamers are dreaming and then the dream is dreaming us, but how crazy is it that we're being overrun with it and then all of a sudden there's this
Pandemic.
and you have a use for it and you're running out of it. So was nature oversupplying something because it was in preparation for something? I mean, you know, there's all these senses going on around us we're not tapped into in our daily lives. And I know that that's really part of, you know, main journey of a healer, of an herbalist, a soul as yourself to try and, you know, put the mundane on the back burner at some point in life and listen to the larger, you know, sphere around you.
Exactly. And, you know, in the 90s, James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis came out with the Gaia hypothesis. And it was the first time, of course, indigenous people have been saying this for millennia.
Right.
And I say indigenous, Celtic indigenous, Mongolian indigenous.
The old ways, the traditions,
You
the
know,
ancient
they've
wisdom.
forever known that it's alive. But the beautiful thing about the Gaia hypothesis is they were saying how there's this interspecies communication and that the planet, it's all in self-correction. So for all we know, the heating of the planet could be this self-correcting mechanism, but we don't have the value of 100-year, 1,000-year vision.
Right.
So as herbalists, I mean, Phyllis Light's this profound, she wrote a great book, Southern Folk Medicine, and she's been a dear, dear friend and teacher, and what her 4 generations of Creek grannies and elders have taught her is every season watch the plants that are in proliferation. Some years there's a ton of mullein, some years there's a ton of sumac. And she was always taught, harvest what you see coming on because you'll be needing that. That wasn't New Age. That's an old age, watch the earth. Right. And so there's a lot of conversations we're having at once here. But for the kudzu, you know, we'll have to wait and see. But it is a food. And we are really facing dire consequences with climate change and food. And so it's steroidal, and there's nutrition there. And if we slow down on the black cohosh consumption, and menopausal women are some of the largest consumers of natural medicine, we have income, we're intelligent, we don't want to take drugs, and so we're turning to herbs, and we don't know any better, so we buy cohosh, but if we start putting kudzu there, that then eradicates a lot of the excesses of where it's growing. And the thing with kudzu is what you see is pretty much what's there. It doesn't crawl into the forest.
Okay.
And so there's a protective wall of what's growing in the forest, and I cannot make any statements. I mean, all I can do is observe.
Yeah.
You know, I'm too old to pretend like I can make statements about nature, but I just see these walls.
That's very humble of you. Very humble.
God, you get humbler as you get older. It's so great. You can ask anybody how old they are, and you can do whatever.
It's like, you know, Bob Dylan, I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. You're like, go wait, I really, you know. But that's, to me, right, that's a true sign of somebody who is willing to learn, because you're like, wait a second, my cup is not full. You know, it's not, I mean, not that you're not overflowing with beautiful abundance. Here we are in your, you know, your sacred home, and I'm so grateful to be here. But I guess what I'm getting at is that the fool is probably the most valuable character, and, you know, in the tarot, and be honest, because
the end.
Right, but it's like you have room to grow. You if you walk around, you know, saying, oh, I know everything, which we've all
Gets
experienced
boring.
that in ourselves and in other people.
I've been there.
What do you get to learn then? I mean, what fun is
Been
that?
there, done that, even been recorded. That's the humbling part.
Well, that's the great part now about the age that we live in, right? Somebody gets to go back and say, actually, you're on record saying.
Well, that was sort of the terrifying, vulnerable part of the book is I can't delete that. Like, that's now going to be in black and white.
Well, that's social media. That's out there forever. I mean, people, they think they're deleting something. Once it's out in the sphere. But, I mean, isn't that interesting, though, that that's the way life is anyways? Whether, I mean, you believe it to be that way tangibly, once you put that energy out there, I mean, it's out there.
Right, and hopefully most of it's fading. Hopefully most of it's like just kind of the chatter. What
do you mean by that?
Well, I work a lot with Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah, tell us about that, because you have that in the book, the Ayurvedic and the Chinese, and you brought up earlier on the authenticism, right? Being authentic.
Right.
And you also talk about, unpacking colonialism. Mm-hmm. How do you feel being, somebody who is not of Chinese descent, right? Assumably.
Right. Great.
Or of Indian
great.
descent.
Good for you.
And to be able to talk about Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine. Tell us about that.
Good for you, because this will really practice me for taking the book on the road, because believe me, there's going to be a lot of
who were you?
thought about that.
Really, it's an interesting point for people to bring up. They're like, well, what right do you have to speak on a subject? I feel like that's a hot topic right now. People want to know.
Exactly. That's why I started with my own story of indigeneity, going to Ireland, finding my roots, becoming who I am, and then gathering my medicine. And then, Ayurveda was brought to this country by Dr. Vasant Lad because he wanted to share the gems and the wealth and the medicine of Ayurvedic medicine. Chinese medicine has been brought here and practiced and freely shared and opened up, and there's been such an invitation and an exchange. So it's just really interesting where appropriation has come from, indigenous, Afro-Caribbean, how are we taking wisdom? How are we taking knowledge that wasn't brought to us, wasn't shared, wasn't openly offered? Because one of the interesting things is we can go back to Ayurveda, and this is so great because this is it's energetic herbalism, and I know that we're moving from many topics, but there's just a dynamic energy here, and we just might have to do a sequel or something because it's just so much fun. But with the Chinese, the bigger picture is they have articulated for thousands and thousands of years this brilliant energetic language of our body.
Incredible documentation of these.
And their energetic language of the body is the energetic language of the earth. And both of these systems is we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. So the whole point of the book and why the subtitle is a guide to sacred plant traditions through the integration of the elements. Fire, water, wood, metal, air. So I take the elements of each of these systems and really introduce them to us as Westerners and say, this is our fire. This is our agni. This is our digestion. This is hydrochloric acid. Don't put out your fire. Okay. Work with your fire. Look at Americans and acids and their fire, and then they have all these digestive issues, and our hydrochloric acid is our first defense for our immune system.
Right. So what is it, 90% of your immune system is in the gut?
Well, it's in the gut, but hydrochloric acid kills pathogens. And so when you're taking antacids and getting rid of
the hydrochloric acid,
okay, well, there's one filter. that you just got rid of, and then it goes into the other small intestine and the pancreas, and so I'm trying.
Is there a suggestion here that then maybe what your body is responding to is a pathogen that has come in, and when you have something like heartburn or a digestive issue, your body's like going, "Whoa, I'm trying to."
It's a little more. I mean, there is heat.
I know it's more complex, but I'm trying to get.
Well, the moral of the story is just be super, super mindful, but understanding fire. What is our fire? How does it serve us? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have colitis, so I have heat in my system. And so that's what energetic herbalism is. We're not looking at Crohn's or colitis or the name. We're looking at heat.
At the energy force behind it.
Energy, okay. And it's very, very simple. So, for example, somebody comes to me and they're, my gosh, I have constipation, arthritis, dry eyes, kind of insomnia. Mm-hmm. So they might come feeling like they have 4 or 5 things wrong with them.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, but you know what's going on? They're dry. So when you moisten the system, right. You moisten the joints, you moisten with oils and moistening herbs, and constipation is dryness.
Right.
So the beauty of energetic herbalism or acupuncture or Ayurveda or why these have survived is because they work very simply. Ayurveda says 80% of our common maladies can be taken care of through food and herb. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's absolutely huge. So instead of saying, oh my gosh, you have this laundry list, it's so empowering for people to say, oh my God.
I'm
dry.
Hydration, bring in the, yeah.
Yeah, oil or stress. I mean, adrenaline dries. Adrenaline is heat. Adrenaline wants us to run or fight, but if we're constantly stressed, we're constantly heating our system. And so through the book, I'm saying, look, high cholesterol is heat. It's oxidative stress. So I love translating the medical aspects of our world through the energetics because it's like, oh my God.
That must be so liberating for you, especially being
for them.
For them as well, but also with your background as a clinical.
Yeah. It's so cool.
Herbologist to be able to go, okay, like you said, here's this list. And then, you're talking about the balance of these forces. I mean, how liberating is that?
It's super cool. And it's like, that's exciting. That's like, oh my God, there's like this Gaian hypothesis. Mm-hmm. Our body is self-correcting. And so, yes, as an allopath, I know, we need chemo, we need this, we need that. Yeah. But for the majority, I have a teacher, she's Choctaw, and she's magnificent, Karen Sanders, and her partner, Sarah Holmes. And this is what many traditional people say, that, we want our medicines to nudge us. We want to be nudged back into our own self-correcting system.
Right.
We don't even want the herbs to go in and take over. That's completely denying our ability for helping.
Anything in excess is poison. I mean, even medicine. I mean, if you're taking too much of some item.
The dose, the poison's in the dose. I mean, broccoli
but
is
you know
toxic.
what I mean, too.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Over stimulation or, overexposure to any one thing can be poisonous to your system, whether it be something that you're, intaking, through your food, through your diet, or something that you're exposing yourself to emotionally or physically.
Exactly. And I don't know if listeners are aware of Goldenseal, but Goldenseal is
I hope some of them are.
Very popular herbal, quote-unquote, antibiotic.
My mom used to pack that into a tooth when I was a little kid, or into the space where I lost a little tooth to make sure that it didn't get infected.
Yeah, but what was brilliant about that is Goldenseal is a mucous membrane tonic.
Okay.
And so what that means is it's keeping the terrain healthy so infection doesn't take over.
Okay.
What happened was herbal industry got a hold of it and put it together with echinacea and said, echinacea, Goldenseal, herbal antibiotic. it has devastated the native stands of Goldenseal because it's an antibiotic, but it's a mucous membrane tonic. And so this whole energetics is about treating the terrain. So when you treat the terrain, your landscape, your inner ecosystem, you don't get infections. Like diabetics get lots of infections because they have a lot of damp and they have a lot of stagnation. And that's just like a stagnant pond that breeds algae. So what energetic healers do is they look at the terrain. Well, you're too hot, let's cool you. You're too damp and edematous, and, let's move that fluid. So Goldenseal is profound for ulcers. And it was used by eclectic physicians at the turn of the century as a mucous membrane tonic. But look, now we know Heliobacter has ulcers. So they were spot on both ends. So it's the appropriate use of the plants, not letting industry.
All right, just going to interrupt the show real quick to let you know about HerbRally's first course. It's called The Art of Frugal Nutrition, and this is a sliding scale course, and it slides all the way down to free. We also have discount codes of 50% off, 75% off, and full price is $100. But like I said, you can also register for free. This is an ever-expanding course, meaning we're going to keep adding new modules to it. Currently, there is fermentation, dumpster diving, and bone broth. To learn more about the course, go to herbrally.com/frugalnutrition and you'll learn all about it. It's also a fundraiser and a private Facebook group. So if you'd like to learn more about how to feed you and your family nourishing foods without spending a lot of money, The Art of Frugal Nutrition is the course just for you. All right, one more time, herbrally.com/frugalnutrition. And now back to the show. Thanks for listening.
Herbalism is fraught with big pharma in the name
Well, I think
of
everything.
Big nutraceuticals, you know. We're not, it's $1 billion. I think it's like $9 billion industry last year.
Wow.
Herbal medicine.
Talk about appropriation.
Yeah, totally.
Let's take the power away from not only the individual to try and seek what's going on, with their body and get in tune with that, but also, your position as an herbalist, as a healer who has worked with these plants. That's why it was so important for you, your journey in Rappahannock, to have the community respond with, this is who you need to go to. Because their experience and their healing process with themselves involved you and your healing process and your allies, the plants. So if you take that integral connection out of the process, and you've just got, Amazon advertising, here's your immunotonic of Echinacea Goldenseal. That can help some, but like you said, it can hinder some, and it takes out the educational component. Right, exactly. And that whole journey.
And the interesting thing is, how I became an herbalist. If my herbs didn't work, I wouldn't have succeeded.
Right.
So it is me, but it's the plants and using the right plants and then having an incredible community. I got to know a lot of elders in Rappahannock. I felt really, really honored to know, all generations, the musicians, the artists, the hippies, scrambling up Old Rag Mountain and having all kinds of fun and and then I just knew, like, the Jenkins and, and I'm not giving names, but just those traditional families. Right.
Who have a lineage involved with the park there in Rappahannock.
Yeah, and the other great thing is Mennonites. Mennonites were huge teachers of mine because I worked with a midwife early on, and in the old order Mennonites over in Harrisonburg, this was an alternative medicine. They did not go to a hospital.
Right.
So my early years, it was still kind of quote unquote alternative, but they taught me, like when one child got whooping cough because they didn't vaccinate, I moved in with them because all 11 of them got whooping cough, and we figured out how to do this.
Do you still feel that way about that?
About the Mennonites?
You bring up the whooping cough. Yeah. Would you, say that you moved in with them Why? Explain that a little bit
Because
more.
they had to sit in the shower with a lot of children, and the Mennonite community has that they're a community and they have a lot of help, but I just moved in to help them. I mean, I'm talking about I moved in for like 3-4 days. I didn't pack up and move. But I moved in because I had the herbs. I would go gather them. We worked with lobelia. They didn't really have the experience, and they totally trusted me, which was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So we were in this together. And so I wanted to learn and I wanted to help, and then I would travel. I would go get the herbs, and we would come back and we'd do steams.
Yeah.
And their births were profound. Again, it was an alternative. So they had to go all the way.
Yeah. You had to follow that through all the way through.
Yeah, and you had to really, call on other forces, like just really bring in prayer, bring in your skills. And,
I guess I bring it up because it's a very scary, whooping cough.
My son had it, and it wasn't that bad, but I'm telling you what, it was 100 days to the day, because he had this little every night. Like he didn't, he got a little bit, and then I realized after 3 months, it's the 100-day cough, which I thought, wow, that is mind-blowing. Who sat around and counted that? But he was fine. I mean,
yeah,
and I can't make blanket statements, about vaccines or any of that. That's such an intimate, personal journey.
I would never ask you to do something like that.
No, that's fine.
Just curious, especially, in the current climate, what it feels like to be an herbalist and embrace the alternative, or what is now becoming more mainstream. For better or worse, how does that feel? Like, how were people turning to you during COVID? Like when it first, do you know what I mean? I mean, where do you?
It was a pandemic. It was like, holy cow.
That must have stressed you out.
Well, I was writing my book and I was kind of going underground, but God, it's so surreal. Now that we're almost on the other side. Thank God I journaled
Hopefully.
a lot. Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I worked a lot with people with COVID, and what I love, and I think that's why they kind of rushed the book, is, the herbs we turned to were the same herbs that we were using. I guess I'm channeling a past life. But in 1918, we were like pulling out the same plants.
Right, during the Spanish
influenza. The same energetics. Yeah. Boggy lungs, high fever. Tissue states are tissue states. Like the body's elemental response to a virus. The virus can be made in a lab or not made in a lab, but your body's response is going to be the same.
Right.
So bone set, mullein, these are the plants and the medicines that I think give us so much trust and security, because climate change is coming, but heat is heat. Okay. So what are the cooling herbs?
Yeah.
So working with COVID, Kudzu came on, and there was new research, and we were all sharing all kinds of information. But elderberry sold out in the country in 2 months.
Now, so the little bit that I know about elderberry just through osmosis.
Yeah. Well, you got your mother there.
From Mama is sometimes she was like, well, be very careful when you're already, under the weather with taking elderberry, because it can continue to just elongate the process. I guess she was like, it's a total cleanser. I mean, do I have any? I mean, maybe, and she'd probably be like, "You're misquoting me," and I'm not quoting her. But do you know what she's kind of talking about with elderberry in that? I guess she thought that the first thing a lot of people would reach to when they go to Whole Foods or what have you. They're like, "Oh, I'm sick. I'm going to do the echinacea," and I do that all the time. I go, "Okay, I'm going to do my 3 days of echinacea, 5 days off. Give it a rest and go back."
But you don't have to do that.
You don't have to do that?
No, you don't have to do that.
Why not?
Because that was bad research. That was in Germany, and they did bad research.
You don't have to do the 5 days off?
Nope.
So they came up with that with the idea of what you were over.
They were in a lab looking at constituents, isolating, a kind of all the constituents that they do.
Okay.
And it's not traditional.
So you can take echinacea daily?
And
still have the same potency?
Yeah, I don't.
Right. Just because if you don't need it at the time,
if you don't
why?
need it, yeah. And the interesting thing is, but let me go back to elder and your mother.
Yeah.
And it's all about relationships. So, I just wrote a book and have all these definitions and formulas and recipes, but that's my relationship with them.
Right.
Your mother, for folks that don't know her, is incredibly intuitive and has this sensitivity that is very, very unique. And so her relationship, or anybody's, it could be Inuits. There's red elderberry in Alaska. Mm-hmm. So their use can be very different. And that's sort of what we're looking at the appropriation. And, what I'm always asking folks is to develop a relationship, get to know it.
Right.
Sometimes, that's not my relationship with elder. For me, it's proanthocyanidins. It's deep, deep nourishment.
Right.
It's also antiviral.
Yeah.
And so that is really good research that came out of Israel that stopped viral replication. That they really did see that elderberry has that. Elderflower is a very different medicine, and I love elderflower, and it's a diaphoretic, and it's warming, and they're very, very different energies.
But you're talking about like the syrup, like the elderberry syrup that you make?
Elderberry syrup, and it really has to be cooked. You want to cook it, and there's all kinds of things. But it's a preventative, and so why we love herbalists are always teaching how to make elderberry syrup is, we just have it in our fridge during the winter, and it doesn't last. We take hits of it all day long.
Yeah.
It's just preventative.
Right.
And you go for a sip of tea or something, syrup essentially is just strong tea with honey or maple syrup. So if you are sick and you're taking syrup, you need a lot of it. But if you are sick, there would be other herbs I would work with.
Okay.
More specific.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, if a healthy person gets sick, they really don't need herbs. Like in Chinese medicine, you learn acupuncture, and then you learn the herbs. The herbs are for the masters. Like healthy people don't need herbs. You can put them in soups. You can eat them as food. But, we have this relationship of, let me take something right away. But then that denies our bodies mounting an immune response, which is really, really important. Hey, let's get to know this virus.
Yeah.
Let's identify this. Let's wait a day or two. Well, wait a minute, I'm taking a little longer than I need to be. I might be tired. We get sick when we're tired, and more than anything, there's no herb in the world that's going to replace rest.
Yeah. Sleep. I am
nada. Nada.
Proponent of dream work. And, there are sometimes I'm like, I just need to visit my dream self.
There you go. I'm all for that. Yeah, let's go.
Let me detox from this waking life and go to my other waking reality for a little bit. And just,
that's nourishment.
And the other thing is, and this sounds a little wild, but, sometimes a good cry.
Oh.
Have you ever slept better than after a good cry?
The tears from an emotional release are completely different than tears from cutting onions.
Right.
There are immune components. There's a whole chemistry
self-soothing
to our tears from grief. So it's true. Your partner looks the same, your house looks the same, but you had a good cry, and man, I feel so much better. But there's the yard, and there are the dishes. But I feel better.
how has your metamorphosis through the journey of this book, I mean, where do you feel like you are now? I mean, you started out the show and your book with your beginning. And when I stepped foot into your beautiful abode, you said you should always start at the beginning. So, I mean, now here we are at the end of the show.
Right. Beautiful. What fun. Wow, what a great journey,
I know.
too. This was so fun. Can't wait to do it again.
Yes, we're going to have a volume 2 for
Oh,
listeners.
lovely,
Yes, absolutely. She's coming back on Rappahannock Radio. Speaking of Rappahannock, there's a lot of new faces. There's a lot of movement. Rappahannock has changed a lot. How have you seen? Now you're in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
But you got to Charlottesville through Rappahannock.
Of
Right?
course. Of course.
Tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that journey.
Yeah, so I got to Rappahannock from D.C., just really realizing if I really want plant medicine, I have to go to the plants. It's not
Yeah.
a cerebral academic experience. And that's what sent me to the mountains, because our mountains are the true apothecary. And so, of course, you know, when I first moved to Charlottesville, I have to be very honest, and I might tear up right now, and I am, and this is for all my dear, dear Rappahannock friends. You know, it was so hard to go back. And, you know, what kind of sent me down to Charlottesville was this near-death experience that my father and I had in Costa Rica. And, you know, I came back and I was given that gift. In some ways, I think a near-death experience is such a gift of life, because it's like, I could go tomorrow. And I'd been having dreams, and my mother had come to me a dream, and some of my friends didn't even know I was going to move to Charlottesville. It was very sudden and very quick, and it kind of released me out of Rappahannock. And I think that's what I needed, because the enchantment and the depth of the dream state that lives in Rappahannock is so real and palpable. And some people say, well, we get stuck here or this happens, but it is like no other place. And so that's the land, that's the medicine. You know, I write about medicine of place. And so what happens in those hollers and, you know, the fields and the meadows, and, you know, I worked really long and hard at those planning commission meetings and with Mr. McCarthy and the whole host of characters trying to maintain Rappahannock's incredible magic and beauty. And we worked hard at that. And at the same time, it was gentrification. It was, we wanted a 25-acre minimum, and we didn't want people subdividing into developments, but where are the locals going to live? How are they going to afford it? And all of the teachers having to move. And so that was there in the early 80s, and quite a struggle of...
It's still,
Well, I think it's even
struggle.
more
it's
when
worse.
I return, and I'm speaking now as an outsider, but I've gotten over the sadness and my journey. It was a dream here, and sometimes you just have to, when you're given a mission, you just have to take that mission. And it took me such a long time, but this house is magnificent, the land, and everything is so perfect. And also, you know, people say, oh, I have a soulmate. Well, you know, you can have 5 soulmates. And so I have a home here, and Rappahannock will always be my home.
Yeah.
You know, I have a home in Costa Rica. You know, that's that soul place. And so Rappahannock, you know, is my home. And now I go back with joy and glee. And, oh, my God, this is great. And also what I've been feeling is, you know, with an influx of, you know, wonderful people, now everybody can work from home. The sad thing for me is there's this sense of possession. You know, the artists and the people that have been there for 20 years, 30 years, crafting, you know, from kind of from scratch, crafting from scratch. We chose that. We wanted it, but we sacrificed. We didn't have, a lot of things, but we had community.
Yeah.
And so one of my prayers is that, with new people arriving, that, they move into these fabulous community organizations and RAC and organizing and, gathering incredible music, that they also understand that it's just like land. There is no such thing as owning land.
Right.
There is no such thing as owning the magic of Rappahannock.
Right.
It isn't, those that have been there for 20 or 30 years and yet our blood, sweat, and tears are a little more woven into the fabric of the landscape. And so, my prayer is that those that are arriving, really arrive quietly and
hold
with
space
humility and with gratitude.
Right.
Just holy cow.
Yeah.
How is this place still in existence when it is so incredibly close to Washington? Really appreciating the fact that this jewel has been as clear and pure and hip. And now, in Sperryville, you just used to go to the grocery store. Now I drive through.
We've got 5 breweries. We've got a little cafe with
I'm like, hey, this wasn't here. We were at Coon Holler. We were, we created. Yeah. We created, those places for us. And there's no good, worse, or better. But so that's, and it's happening everywhere. So we call it gentrification. Yeah. We call it appropriation. We were talking about appropriation earlier. I mean, that's, it's kind of taking what isn't ours and how do we go into native cultures and really deeply appreciate, how can we really appreciate and how can we feel welcome and enjoy and really understand that merging. And so that's the same with, the international traditions, with its Chinese or Ayurveda. Step number 1 is honor, 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 and allow that voice. It's not as though we're giving voice to the voiceless. During Black Lives Matter, that was we're giving voice to the voiceless. That's ridiculous. They've been singing, they've been praying, who we think is voiceless. They've been speaking forever. We haven't been listening.
Right. And there's something to be said about the hypocrisy of all of a sudden we're giving someone a voice. I mean, it sounds like you're on a podium
in itself.
Right. You're on your pedestal saying, well, I now allow you to speak.
Right.
But it does bring up an interesting subject, not only with people and, natives, who are natives? When are you considered native? I mean, technically, most of us, I think I have like 1/16 Cherokee on my dad's side, but that is a drop, right? So I don't claim to be Native American, but those are the true natives here. And then like you bring up the example of Rappahannock and you've got, the people that have a legacy connected to the park before the park even existed. And then you have this wave of bohemian settlers.
We were gentrifying, but living in the same shacks.
Right. Well, and that's what I'm trying to touch on here is, do you think that, and you were part of this wave of bohemian, I wouldn't call you colonizers though, because I think that you were doing exactly what you're asking people to do now, not just in Rappahannock, but everywhere, which is you were holding space for the traditional.
Well, we're getting deep here.
Well,
no, it's deep time.
Why stop now?
Well, what's so funny is...
because a lot of people could say that you guys came in and you're like, here come all these hippies in the 70s and 80s.
We were, though, and I think if anybody's familiar with Teja Cole, the Nigerian-American Harvard journalist, author, he really brought forward, the white savior complex.
Right.
Okay, so that's different, but, I kind of went through my own white savior complex because I went to the Peace Corps.
Right.
And I was sort of in that realm, and we didn't have that language. We wouldn't have thought we were the white saviors, but it's those who were going to help, or those that were on the receiving end, quote unquote, that would have had those words. So what I'm trying to say is when we arrived, 30 years ago, we did spend a lot more time with the local, whether the musicians or the farmers. But at the end of the day, our cultures were really separate.
Right.
So there is not a doubt in my mind that they did not perceive us
As outsiders.
in that same way.
You're right.
And again, it's not as though we were moneyed and we were moving in, but we possibly were taking rentals that they're
Right.
cousins. And so
Right.
it's called evolution.
Right.
It's called development, and it's how do we do that consciously? So, yes, here I can say, oh, you that are coming in that's new, please be mindful of the blood, sweat, and tears that has made this such a profound artist community. And at the same time, I will have to say, there was a lot of mingling. As much was comfortable with those that were in Rappahannock,
Right.
100 years before. It's not like, it's like it's like trying to get people of color into Waldorf.
Right.
They don't want to go to Waldorf.
Yeah.
They don't want to wear T-shirts without logos on them. We're just trying to do this tokenism thing. So when we would move in and invite local farmers to parties, they didn't want to come. And yet there was a consciousness. There was this ability, and we, wave and they were friendly. But we also have to understand, how natural, how organic is that blending. And I think it's different now in Rappahannock. I think the strata, we're talking about really different things.
Right.
But you know what? Truth be told, Kai, we were doing that 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah. So how did you guys deal with affordable housing then?
We did. I mean, there were a lot of tenant homes.
Yeah. So, the
and they've
possibility
been
of tenant
taken
homes.
down. There were tenant homes. There were farms. It was a lot more organic. There were a lot more. I mean, look at, Red Oak Mountain. How many people lived in that infamous house that was, held up by two 2x4s? So,
I think there's it'll go unnamed, but a story of a mutual friend of ours that I know that you know.
Well, many
and
of
they were
them.
all up on Red Oak Mountain, and I think one of the actual owners of the property came up and was like, "Hey, do you guys have permission to be here?" And and the kid's like, "I was born here," and just keeps like going back to playing frisbee or whatever it was like.
Well, I mean, what is that? Squatters' rights? But, I do want to say this because it's really hard for people that have just discovered it and they have the privilege and they have the ability to go and be in this magnificent place. And, we all have that right, and that's what's called America. But, I do want to say this really beautiful point that we can have the zoning, and I'm coming to this whole other realization from research for my book that, Native Americans, they don't have a word for wilderness. And for them, places that are wilderness are considered abandoned. And so they're now coming up with traditional ecological knowledge, and it's taught in colleges. And now the federal government is even going to Native peoples now to learn how to do forest fires, how to do preservation, and the whole engagement. When John Muir arrived in California, he thought this was this natural paradise. Well, the whole Yosemite Valley was planted.
Wow.
It was planted by natives who had been occupying the West Coast for 10,000 years. And why there are no archaeological finds, there's arrowheads, but their whole way of living was to not leave a trace.
Which is the whole those are the founding principles of the national park.
So what's interesting is we put these huge places in a wilderness, And what native peoples are saying is you take people out of a wilderness area and you've lost a keystone species. And those native peoples knew how to plant and seed and keep the plant communities healthy. So whether it's new arrivals in Rappahannock, whether it's new policies as far as our wilderness land management, we're in this huge period of transformation and transition. And, you know, Joseph Chilton Pearce, this brilliant author and scientist, you know, he writes how in stable systems, change will not happen.
Right.
Because there's stability, there's balance, there's no way in. And he was saying that in this time, as these systems are being dismantled, as there is this great time of chaos, he said, just continue practicing your practice. Follow your permaculture, follow your herbal medicine, follow your solar panels, follow all the technology, energetic, you know, physical. Do that so that as the systems are falling apart, we're there to really have our new energy systems, our new medical systems in place.
Right.
You know, that collapse does not mean everything is collapsing. While the core may be collapsing, the fringe is getting stronger, is getting deeper, are getting better connected, are finding ways to really collaborate, really bring forest management, native management, and get that all set up so that it's this very organic movement, that we can have this replacement. Replacement kind of seems like an old school world, just a new way, you know, and that's what's happening. You know, as dismal as these times are, they are so incredibly electric. They are so incredibly exciting when you read about so many things. You know, I could go on and on with some of the
So energetic.
Oh, so energetic. Yeah, baby. That's what we're talking about. Getting the energy up and running. And where's our source of energy?
Come on and feed me your garden.
Okay, so I'm so glad you asked about what's a clinical herbalist and what's a community herbalist, because that's such a heated debate in our field of herbalism. And the American Herbalist Guild is our professional organization, and we've had knockdown, drag-out fights about licensure and no licensure, and finally we're at a really fabulous place where we have accreditation, but there's no licensure, because when you license, you know, the granny herbalists in Alabama would not be part of our guild. You know, Native, Caribbean. So we fought long and hard to really keep it free. And we are the one healing profession that is not licensed. And that gives us incredible freedom.
Yeah.
So you can be a community herbalist, you can be clinical herbalist, and because I kind of am Scorpio and I dive deep and I love science. I'm a recovering scientist, and I think science is the articulation of spirit. And so if you do a psychedelic or an entheogenic and you see fractals and you see the world of spirit, it looks like constituents. It looks like chemicals. So I don't separate scientific herbalism from sacred herbalism because science is the language of spirit. And so when I say clinical, though, I'm pretty rigorous in my training. It's 3 years. I bring in incredible guest teachers. I have anatomy and physiology. I bring in Chinese teachers. I bring in as best as I can get to the source. But it's 3 years, and they pay their dues, and they're able to be professional members of the American Herbalist Guild. And why I love that is, you can take weekend courses, you can do a little of this, a little of that, but you're stepping into a person's very intimate, sacred space. And when people are sick, they're incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I really don't want these new age sayings of, oh, you haven't had a good mother, you need motherwort. I'm really rigorous as far as what's the assessment, what's the tissue state, tongue, pulse. Let's hold this space very professionally. And it takes a while to learn that. And you don't learn that, in weekend courses, if you will. So that's a really important part for me. And a long time ago on Miriam Harris's farm, Miriam and Corey, what a duo for anyone listening that remembers back to those days. Miriam was such a profound leader in biodynamic farming. She was the head of the biodynamic group here. And so she would bring all these incredible scientists. And I had this Chinese physician on the farm, and I remember one day he said to me, Kathleen, a healer's goal is obsolescence. And I thought, oh, that's profound. That's cool. But how can you become obsolete? How are you going to live? How are you going to eat? And so about 5-6 years ago, I had the incredible privilege and honor to realize what he was talking about. And that's through my clinical training. I now have enough graduates where I don't have a practice. So I've become obsolete. And I'm so deeply grateful. I could disappear tomorrow. And herbalism would thrive here in Charlottesville. And I know this sounds very egoic.
I hope you don't.
I don't either, because the tour is coming, and that's the party part. But, there's an apothecary here, and Teresa's doing the same thing with Green Comfort and other herbalists. This is what we're doing. Every village needs an herbalist. And so,
you and Teresa have the roots together, right?
Oh my
you guys
gosh,
are intertwined.
Of course. Oh, we're more than intertwined.
Soul sisters.
We are soul sisters that were born from the dream time. And that's, a whole beautiful story in of itself. And
for volume 2.
For volume 2.
We're doing some big advertising for our volume.
A series.
For the post-book tour interview. And you let us know how to get...
But that's what she's doing. There's Colleen and Wild Roots, and we're just.
And she was saying the same thing,
spreading the word. So it's so fabulous to become obsolete. I really understand what that is, and it's freeing. Yeah. It's absolutely freeing,
and it's again very humbling for you to say that, because especially in a world that's obsessed with not being obsolete. I mean, they want to make sure that.
Well, that's the wisdom of aging. You just don't want to be. You don't want to be talking about your Aunt Thelma's thyroid. You've done 1,000 thyroids. And, okay,
isn't that what we started the show with the thyroid?
Well, it comes up a lot, right? It's an epidemic. And I will say one more thing. What I do now has been my fantasy as an herbalist. Now I can talk to people about their health on the street, whenever, on my front porch, and I don't have to keep notes, and there's no money exchanged, and I don't have to do anything, and I have a huge apothecary with staff. I'm like, they'll go fill your order, but I am free. And this is how herbalists, you should sit on the front porch and, go get this, or I'll take them into my garden, or
So you've already spread your seeds. You became a flower.
And now I'm
you
free.
seed-headed out, and now you've got your, populated the garden around you.
Yeah, they are. They are beautiful, beautiful medicines growing out there.
Kat Maier, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kiaya. All right.
First man and first woman, mixing up the blood. Came the first children, the mighty roots of love. And these children, they must survive this time. The roots are growing deeper. Got to feed mankind, yeah. Deeper grow the roots, it's time for the tree. Got to feed the roots of the family. Deeper grow the roots, it's time for the tree. Got to feed the roots of your family. We survived the ice, we survived the fire, we survived the mighty flood. Can we survive this love and these children? They got to survive these times, and the roots are growing deep.